I just got home to find a cop threatening my dad. That was his big mistake. You never expect to walk into a war zone in your own front yard. But that's exactly what I saw the moment I stepped out of my car that Friday night. A white police officer, tall, square jaw, hand already resting on his holster, towering over my father like he was some kind of criminal. My father, Professor Elijah Carter, 63 years old, voted most beloved by 3 generations of students, still tucks in his shirt for a trip to the grocery store. That man doesn't even jaywalk. And yet there he was, standing on our porch, hands partially raised like he was some kind of threat. I froze for a second, keys still dangling in my hand. My brain couldn't compute what my eyes were seeing. "Is there a problem, officer?" I asked, stepping forward slowly. The cop didn't turn to acknowledge me. He kept his eyes on my father like he was waiting for him to flinch. I repeated, louder now, "Is there a problem?" The officer finally turned. His eyes scanned my hoodie, jeans, skin, and I saw it. That flicker, that quick mental calculation. Black male, mid-20s, possible threat, no weapon visible. Cautious approach. He didn't respond to me. Instead, he looked back at my father and barked, "Show me your ID." Now, my dad's voice was calm, but I could hear the tremble under the surface. "This is my home. I'm standing on my porch. You haven't told me why you're here." The officer stepped closer. "Someone reported a suspicious person matching your description. I don't need a reason." "That's not true," I snapped. "You need probable cause." He ignored me again, his hand twitching near his belt. My father stayed perfectly still. That's when I pulled out my phone and hit record. "You're being filmed," I said, "just so you're aware." The cop's eye snapped to me, and I saw the shift. Not fear anger. The kind of anger that comes from being challenged in a space where he expected compliance. "What's your name?" he demanded. I didn't answer. My phone was already live streaming to my social. Comments started flying in within seconds. My father spoke softly. "Officer, I live here. My name is Dr. Elijah Carter. I teach philosophy at the university. My son just came home from work. I don't know what you were told, but I assure you, I haven't left my property tonight." The officer didn't back down. "I'm not going to ask again. ID now." My dad sighed, slow and deliberate. "I'm going inside to get it." He turned toward the door. "Don't move," the officer barked, stepping forward fast. That's when I moved. Instinct took over. I stepped between them, arm out. "Back up," I said. "You don't get to threaten him in his own house." The cop's face twisted. His hand was fully on his gun now. That was when the sirens blared. Not his. Ours. A second squad car pulled up, then a third. Neighbors came out of their houses. Phones out, lights flashing. Someone was yelling. Another officer got out a cruiser, looking between me and the first cop like he'd walked in on a lit fuse and a box of matches. Then my dad said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is a mistake." But it's not my mistake. Everything froze. That was the end of the beginning. The next day, the video had over 2 million views. Comments poured in from all over the country. "Protect black elders." "That officer needs to be fired." "This could have ended like George Floyd." "This is why we need police reform." And then the media requests came. I turned them all down. Not because I was scared, because I was angry, focused. I wasn't going to let this get swept under a rug. Not this time. That officer's name was Jack Whitman. 9 years on the force. For previous complaints, all unsubstantiated. His record was spotless, technically, but I knew what that really meant. It meant he knew how to stay just this side of illegal. Just enough to avoid getting fired. Just enough to keep the system protecting him. But not this time. This time, he picked the wrong family. We weren't some name with no clout. We weren't invisible. We had voices, and we knew how to use them. I spent the next week gathering everything security cam footage from neighbors, statements from people on our street, even a Ring camera video showing Whitman driving past our house 3 times that evening before finally stopping. I filed a formal complaint, attached a letter from my father's attorney, cited case law, quoted policy from the department's own code of conduct. They opened an investigation. Meanwhile, the university held a rally for my father. 300 students stood in the quad holding candles. Not because he asked, because they believed in him. Because this man had mentored them, guided them, love them. I spoke at the end. My father taught me how to think, I said. He also taught me how to stand. And today, we stand with him. Because what happened wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a symptom of something much bigger. And we are not going to pretend otherwise. The applause shook the air. And somewhere across town, I hope Officer Whitman felt it. The pressure. The wave building. Because I wasn't finished. I filed a Freedom of Information Act request for Whitman's past body cam footage. I called a civil rights attorney. And I started talking to other families. People who had stayed silent out of fear. One woman told me how Whitman had pulled her 17-year-old son over and made him sit on the curb for an hour for driving suspiciously. No ticket, no report, just humiliation. There were patterns, and I was going to expose them. Because the real story wasn't just what happened to my dad. The real story was how often it happened to people without cameras, without witnesses, without voices. But I had a voice, and I was going to use it like a sledgehammer. The city didn't expect a storm, but it was coming, and I was the lightning. The internal investigation began as they all dealt with bureaucracy and closed doors. Officer Whitman was placed on administrative leave, with pay. I wasn't surprised. That's how the system buys time, hoping things cool down. But I didn't cool down. I burned. A week after the rally, I met with attorney Keisha Langston, one of the fiercest civil rights lawyers in the state. She didn't blink as she watched the footage from my phone. When it ended, she simply said, "We're suing the city." My father was hesitant at first. "I just want to live in peace," he said. "I've lived my whole life keeping my head down. I don't want to fight." I nodded. "But they brought the fight to our porch. You just stood there. You didn't even raise your voice." He looked at me with tired eyes. "That's the problem, isn't it?" And it almost wasn't enough to save me. So we filed. The lawsuit accused the police department of racial profiling, excessive force, and negligence in maintaining accountability of officers with prior complaints. That alone drew attention from national outlets. CNN, MSNBC, even NPR called. I gave one interview, just one. "Do you hate the police?" the reporter asked. I shook my head. "No. I hate what happens when power goes unchecked. I hate that a man who's done nothing wrong still has to raise his hands in front of his own house." The internet took care of the rest. The video climbed to 5 million views. Celebrities began tweeting about my father. Hashtag spread. Stand with Elijah. Porch not prison. But not everyone was cheering. The threats started coming in. At first, they were anonymous DMs. "You're a liar. Your dad's a thug." Then phone calls. Then a dead rat on our doorstep. My mother called from Michigan. She wanted us to leave the house for a while, come stay with her. My father refused. "I've lived in this house for 37 years, he said. "I'm not leaving because of a coward with a Sharpie and no courage to knock on the door." But he double-locked the windows that night. Then came the department's press conference. They called the incident unfortunate but under review. They praised Officer Whitman's service record. They said he responded in accordance with standard operating procedures. Standard procedures. That phrase echoed in my skull like a gunshot. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and whispered into the camera for the next video. "They call it standard," I said. "But there's nothing standard about threatening an old man on his porch. There's nothing standard about drawing your weapon on someone who never even moved. There's nothing standard about assuming blackness equals danger." The video went viral overnight. It caught the attention of someone I never expected, Officer Whitman's former partner. His name was Julio Reyes. Retired 2 years ago. He messaged me privately and asked to meet. We sat across from each other at a diner, sipping bitter coffee. He was always like that, Julio said. Didn't matter if it was an old man, a kid, or a woman walking home alone. If they were black or brown, he saw a threat. "Why didn't you report him?" I asked. "I did. Twice. They buried it both times." He handed me a flash drive. "This is from my personal camera, not official body cam. I kept it because I knew someday this would matter." It did. The footage showed Whitman stopping a young black teenager walking home from school. No reason given. Just shouting. Accusation. The boy crying. At one point, Whitman says, "You fit the description of someone who makes trouble around here." There was no arrest, no citation, just trauma. I cried watching it. Not because it surprised me, but because it didn't. We gave it to Keisha. She nearly jumped out of her chair. "This changes everything," she said. "This shows pattern, and pattern proves intent." The city scrambled. They tried offering a settlement. Quiet money. We refused. That's when they released a partial statement trying to discredit my dad. They mentioned an incident from 20 years ago where he'd been questioned during a protest. Left out that he was there as a faculty advisor. Left out that he de-escalated a situation before police even arrived. Left out that he'd been praised by the dean for his role that day. But the damage was done. The trolls latched onto it. They posted his old faculty photos, called him radical, anti-cop, fake professor. One even mocked the way he spoke. I asked my dad if he wanted to stop. He looked at me and said, "Son, if I back down now, I'm telling every student who ever believed in me that it's not worth standing up. I won't do that." And then he smiled. Besides, I taught philosophy. If there's one thing I believe in, it's the truth. And the truth doesn't flinch. That weekend, we held a town hall at the community center. Over 100 people came. One by one, they shared stories. A Latino woman whose son had been stopped 15 times before age 21. An elderly black veteran who had been mistaken for a burglar in his own garage. A trans woman of color harassed for simply existing. The pain wasn't isolated. It was systemic, and it bled through every seat in that room. I recorded it all. We turned it into a documentary short called Porchlight, Stories They Tried to Silence. It aired on local TV. The DA took notice. They opened a separate inquiry. Then came the subpoenas. Emails, text records, internal memos. And buried deep in the paperwork was a complaint filed against Whitman from a rookie cop who quit the force just 6 months in. It alleged that Whitman had used slurs in front of detainees, called one suspect just another monkey in a hoodie, and laughed when a young man pissed himself during a legal stop. The rookie had left the force disillusioned. But now, he was ready to talk. He came forward in a televised interview, said he couldn't stay silent any longer. The tide turned. Public pressure mounted. The mayor released a statement condemning systemic bias in law enforcement. Officer Whitman resigned. But it wasn't enough. Not for me. Because resignation wasn't justice. It was an escape hatch. So we kept going. The civil case moved forward. And the state attorney general began exploring criminal charges abuse of power, civil rights violations. I knew we might never see him behind bars. But sometimes justice looks like a cracked mask. Like a man forced to see himself without the badge. Like a community refusing to forget. In the weeks that followed, I saw something shift. Young kids walking through our neighborhood without looking over their shoulders. Neighbors talking to one another who had never spoken before. A mural appeared on the side of the community center me dad's face, surrounded by doves and books and a porch light glowing bright. Underneath it, the words, "Truth doesn't flinch." And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we're building something better. Not just for us, but for everyone. They scheduled the court date for early fall, the same week the trees in our neighborhood began turning gold and red. Something about that felt right. Like we were entering a new season, not just of weather, but of reckoning. Outside the courthouse that morning, a crowd had already gathered. I saw signs with my dad's name, signs that said "Justice for Elijah." There were pastors, teachers, teenagers, even a few off-duty cops who wanted the world to know they didn't stand with Whitman. Dad wore a gray suit, the same one he'd worn at my college graduation. As we waited to walk in, I asked him how he felt. "Nervous," he said, then paused. "But not scared. Not anymore." The courtroom was packed. Whitman sat across the room, flanked by lawyers. No uniform, just a stiff, black suit that didn't quite hide how pale and tense he looked. He didn't meet our eyes. Our attorney, Keisha Langston, began with power. She played the porch video again, this time on a full screen for the jury. It was surreal watching it in that setting. The way Dad stood still. The tremble in his voice when he asked, "Why are you doing this?" The way the officer's hand never left his weapon. Gasps rippled through the room. Then came the other evidence. Julio Reyes testified first. He spoke slowly, carefully, but without hesitation. "I watched him harass people for years," he said. And I regret every day I stayed silent. Then came the former rookie. Then came the mother of the boy from the flash drive video. Then came the boy himself now, 17, eyes fierce, voice steady. He called me a threat, he said. I was 13, carrying a trumpet. The defense tried to discredit them. Misremembered, overstated, out of context. But the jury could see what was happening. They saw the pattern. They saw the fear. They saw my father. And then it was Dad's turn. He walked up slowly, adjusted the microphone, and looked directly at the jury. I've been black my whole life, he said. I've been followed through stores, pulled over for driving too slow, asked why I lived in a nice neighborhood. I've endured that because I believed that if I stayed calm, stayed educated, stayed polite, I'd be safe. He paused. And that day, on my own porch, I realized something. None of that ever guaranteed my safety. It only delayed the moment someone would decide I didn't belong. A silence fell over the courtroom like a heavy blanket. My son filmed that video not to go viral. He filmed it because he thought he might watch his father die. That's what you need to understand. He stepped down. The jury took only 6 hours. They found in our favor. $2.3 million in damages. But that wasn't the win that mattered. Because 2 weeks later, the state attorney general filed criminal charges against Whitman, assault under color of authority, and civil rights violations. It made national news. And finally, something cracked in the system. The police department announced a full review of prior complaints. The city created a civilian oversight board with subpoena power. And every patrol officer was required to complete an updated racial bias training program co-designed by our lawyer, Keisha and my dad. Yes, my dad. He didn't just want justice. He wanted change. They asked him to help lead community outreach sessions conversations between officers and citizens. At first, he declined. I'm not a trainer, he said. I'm just an old man who reads too many books. But one night, he came home with a notebook full of ideas. He sat at the kitchen table, scribbling until midnight. I think I want to help them see what we see, he said. Maybe if they learn to see us, they'll stop fearing us. One of the officers he worked with was a young black cop named Darnell. They clicked instantly. Mr. Elijah's a real one, Darnell told me one day. He doesn't yell, doesn't shame, just tells the truth in a way you can't ignore. And that was the point. Not to shame, but to shine a light. A porch light. Something steady. Unblinking. Months passed. The media attention faded. The hashtag slowed. But the movement didn't stop. Our community kept organizing. Keisha started a legal aid fund for victims of police misconduct. I joined her staff, documenting cases, filming stories, editing clips late into the night. Sometimes I come home and see my dad sitting on the porch. He'd wave me over, hand me a glass of iced tea, and we'd sit in silence, listening to the cicadas. You know, he said once, that porch used to be where I went to escape the world. Now it's where the world changed for me. I nodded. That's the thing about porches. They're not just escapes. They're thresholds. He smiled. Another time, I asked him if he ever wished none of it had happened. He thought for a long time. Of course I do, he said. I wish I hadn't seen fear in your eyes that day. I wish I hadn't heard my own voice shake. But wishing doesn't change what happened. Building something better? That does. The trial against Whitman dragged on. His lawyers filed delays. He tried to relocate, but the charges stuck. And even if he never served time, his name would never again be tied to a badge. He was exposed. The mask had cracked. The man had been seen. And that mattered. In June the next year, the city unveiled a new mural downtown. It featured portraits of community leaders, teachers, volunteers, survivors. In the center, a man in a gray suit stood calmly on his porch, one hand at his side, the other holding a book, his eyes steady, his jaw set. Above him were the words, "The moment we stop being afraid to be seen is the moment change begins." My dad looked at it and whispered, "They even got the glasses right." He laughed, then cried, then laughed again. We held a celebration that night. Families, neighbors, activists, even officers. No speeches, just food, music, joy. And as the sun set and the porch light came on above our front door, I realized we'd done more than win a case. We'd reclaimed something. Our space. Our voices. Our dignity. And in that moment, as fireflies danced and voices rose in song, I finally understood what my father meant when he said truth doesn't flinch. Because that night, I watched it shine. Not in the courtroom, not on the news, but right there on the porch, where it all began, where we stood, where we stayed, where we were seen,